I recently got the itch after 3.5 years to finally play the Saints Row Reboot DLC. Yes, despite being a defender of the game, someone who played it the day it came out and suffered through every single game-breaking bug because I enjoyed it enough to ignore that, I had never bought the expansions. And it was cheaper to buy the gold edition of the game on sale on Steam than to buy just the DLC on Epic where I already owned a copy of the game. So I thought, why not save some money and have fun with a full replay of the game in the process? I can enjoy the bug fixes and various quality of life updates I missed out on before, play the DLC for the first time, and then maybe make a long retrospective review on the whole thing to share a rare, overall positive perspective on the game when everyone else is so dedicated to hating it. I wanted to share my thoughts on both what was done well and what was done poorly. It's certainly a mixed bag. Both a game I'm very fond of, but one that flopped so hard it killed off all of Saints Row forever, which I consider my guilty pleasure series of games. Of course, an entire review of the game to the extent I was hoping for, going over just about every aspect of it possible, is an ambitious project for someone who hasn't made a game review or analysis in, a hot minute, let's say that. And if something feels overly ambitious, I'm not going to want to finish it. This channel is merely a hobby of mine. I want to make videos because it's fun. But thankfully, before I started working on that and inevitably got burnt out, I realized that there was one particular area of the game that I could focus in on instead, one that I had already figured would take up way too much real estate in a full review. So, this is that video, one that I will be calling The Eli Problem. Now, I'm no stranger to overanalyzing Saints Row characters. For the longest time, I've wanted to make a video talking about how much I dislike Shauna's character arc throughout the series, because I feel like a lot of it centers around her self-victim blaming without properly acknowledging that it's incredibly unfair to herself. And maybe all these years later, I'll replay Saints Row 4 and decide I was wrong about all of that. If not, maybe that will be a future video from me. But the point is, I like analyzing the characters and their story arcs and roles. And something that I really started feeling by the end of my replay of Saints Row 2022, which I personally just refer to as Saints Row 5 for the sake of simplicity, was a sort of imbalance between our three main supporting characters. So, allow me to explain. Saints Row 5 follows four main heroes. You, the customizable player character, typically referred to as the boss, and your three roommates. Good friends struggling to get by, who sometimes turn to crime to pay rent, all from different backgrounds. When the game begins, you are a gunman working for the private security organization Marshall Defense Industries. Kevin is a DJ and member of a gang known as the Idols. Nina is a driver for a different gang called Los Panteros, and Eli is an aspiring entrepreneur. Now, Eli's might seem a little less specific than the others, and that's simply because it is. Eli isn't associated with any other organization in the beginning. He stands alone, outside of his obvious loyalty to his roommates, but this is never utilized as a strength of his, and I think that makes it a weakness. Marshall, the Idols, and Los Panteros are the main enemy groups of the game, and we have three lead characters who all have a connection to one of them, and those connections have influence on the story. So if you don't know every plot point of the game, you could see why Eli's lack of prior gang affiliation could be seen as valuable. He can be extra strong in his conviction because there's no push and pull between the side he used to stand on and the side he stands on now. The others might get into trouble because they hesitate to fight their old allies, but because Eli never had any, he can surprise us all, as maybe he's the weakest on the battlefield, but the strongest link in the chain nonetheless. But the story of Saints Row 5 never utilizes this possibility. That push and pull doesn't exist for anyone. Yes, Nina once saw Los Panteros as her family, but once they turn on her and show their true colors, she never shows any pain towards having to fight them. Kevin, the free spirit, fit right in with the anti-establishment attitudes of the Idols, but never finds himself torn between those ideals and the new ideals of the Saints. You yourself only work at Marshall for a few days, and therefore feel absolutely no loyalty towards the corrupt company that fired you, and any friends you made during that time just quickly become your allies anyway. All three of your previous affiliations mean nothing once you cut ties with them, besides having insider information and a chip on your shoulder. So Eli's solo backstory isn't a blessing, it's a curse of just having less tying him directly to the story. It makes it easy to imagine you could cut him out of the story without it changing too much, something that would be harder with Nina or Kevin, as both them and the boss, as I said, use their insider knowledge to take down and steal from the rival organizations. And Eli doesn't get that. Now you might be saying, but Emma, Eli is affiliated with a rival faction, the Dustlanders. And sure, yeah, Eli is the one who is a LARPer and therefore introduces you to that whole side storyline. But the Dustlanders aren't enemies you're normally going to encounter outside of those missions, and they don't function on a notoriety system like the other gangs, so that's not good enough for me. I'm sure one could argue that adding another gang to the mix just so our fourth character Eli can be more included wouldn't make sense. It'd be too much. Look at the other games in the series. Saints Row 1 has the West Side Rollers, Vice Kings, and Los Carnales. Saints Row 2 has the Sons of Samedi, the Brotherhood, and the Ronin. Saints Row the Third has the Morningstar, the Deckers, and the Luchadors. Of course, Saints Row 4 doesn't really work with that formula because, hot take, it and Gat Out of Hell are less of true Saints Row games than the reboot. Yeah, I said it. But the point is, having 3 main gangs is typical. It's the sweet spot, the proper feng shui of cities with crime problems. You can't mess with the formula. But I'm not saying you need to add something more to the story just for Eli. That's not necessary when the fourth faction already exists. Something that actually works with the typical gang rules in-game, unlike the Dustlanders. The motherfucking Popo. Yes, the one and only Santo Ileso Police Department. The older games had police storylines, therefore it clearly is possible to give a Saints Row character a connection to the police. And in Saints Row 5, there is a series of missions that involves lowering the influence of the police department throughout the city, so a framework already exists that you can weave a more personal storyline into. And no, you wouldn't have to recycle the undercover cop plot. There are a bunch of ways you could do it. For just one example, Eli could come from a family with a long law enforcement legacy and was expected to follow in their footsteps. But he wanted to be an entrepreneur instead, and is shown in the story to be very unconfident with guns in the beginning, so maybe he was averse to working with them. His mother could be the chief of police, Chief Michaels, who you briefly interact with in the game, and there could be emotional tension for him when his family is on the right side of the law while he's comfortable committing crimes. The eventual big reveal that Eli is related to a cop, and maybe her own surprise at realizing he's been a part of the Purple Shirt Mafia this whole time, would be a great moment of impact, even if it doesn't matter in the long run and gets wrapped up quickly. The game already has a couple moments that feel emotionally heavy, like Sergio destroying Nina's car, and I think those heavier moments in Saints Row as a whole series are great, because it's awesome to step back for a second out of the goofy chaos and think more about the realistic consequences of these lifestyles and how these over-the-top characters can feel real emotion too. Now, Nina's car is an important detail here because the Eli problem isn't just the lack of any direct ties to the main enemies of the game the way that everyone else has, it's that he lacks the same amount of background depth as well. To be fair, you, the boss, are given very little backstory in the game. All we know is that you went to college at some point, came to Santo Ileso because you wanted to work for a criminal named Davey, got rejected, and ended up where we find you in the beginning. But that limited backstory makes sense, because the character is so customizable that of course everyone playing is going to come up with their own views on where this person might have come from, and they might not enjoy the story filling in details that they want to fill in for themselves. The previous boss character was similarly extremely mysterious in regards to what they did before the start of the game. I mean, they hardly even talk in the first one, so it makes sense.
Hope you don't mind hepatitis.
What?
It makes way less sense for Eli to be so mysterious when we know so much more about Kevin and Nina. Now, it's not like they have entire biographies, but there is a lot you can pick up on for both. Kevin's strength in the story is his connections. He knows just about everyone, and has certainly dated a lot of them, both women and men. He grew up in foster care and wants to volunteer at the local orphanage. He loves to bake, works out at the gym, hates wearing a shirt for whatever reason, loves tattoos, and works as a DJ. Hell, we even know he's allergic to cats. Nina moved to Santo Ileso from Mexico with her family. She's handy with cars and other machinery, and got her precious project car from her mother, who passed away from cancer. She's not only the best getaway driver of Los Panteros, but also an art history major. She's a graffiti artist and has interest in becoming an art collector, and clearly feels strongly when art is unappreciated. What do we know about Eli? Well, next to nothing about what work he's ever done besides robbing stores with his roommates. Does he have a family or another place he ever called home? Not that I remember. He likes listening to motivational speakers. He wears a bow tie. He doesn't like getting shot, but who does? His loyalty mission doesn't reveal anything deep about him. You just teach him to shoot guns better. Yes, he gets to be the LARP guy, but I'm not even sure if the LARP missions are required to complete before you finish the main storyline. And there's nothing serious about them. They're just a silly break from the real-world action. And even in the LARP DLC, he gets sidelined for Gwen to be the main supporting character. Eli doesn't lack personality, not at all, but compared to the other two, he sometimes feels like just a guy. One of your best friends, yes, but the biggest thing he does to drive the plot forward is get shot so that Kevin and Nina have a reason to leave their respective gangs. Beyond that, his role is mostly the whiteboard guy. I think that to improve the balance between the three of them, he needs more motivation to give him a more direct role in moving the story forward. I can use another game in the series as an example of how the secondary character's motivation can be done fairly. Let's take the supporting cast from Saints Row the Third, and hopefully I'm not forgetting anyone, but all of them have a grudge that gives them motivation. Pierce and Shondi's best friend, Johnny Gat, was murdered and their empire was stolen. Obviously, they want revenge against the Syndicate. Angel is a disgraced wrestler who needs to reclaim his glory from Killbane. Kinsey's FBI career was ruined by Matt Miller. Zemos was enslaved by the De Winters because of their own grudge, creating a grudge loop, I guess. Oleg was held captive and experimented on by the Syndicate. And Viola switches sides because her sister is murdered by Killbane right before her eyes. Everyone has clear motivation and ties to an enemy gang, just like Kevin and Nina. Los Panteros show Nina that they don't care about hurting her friends, and they also destroy her car, which she says is worse in that gang than killing someone. She has every reason to want to take down Los Panteros for revenge for hurting her and her loved ones. The idols test Kevin's loyalty by telling him to kill his friends, also showing that they don't care about him as an individual, so he has motivation to take down those hypocritical scumbags too. Both those groups put them in bad situations, so they're forced to make them the enemy. Just like how Marshall sets you up for failure, fires you, and leaves you in a brief depression. So of course you want to shoot Atticus in the face eventually. But Eli's motivation is just that he always wanted to run a business, I guess? Although that might even be a stretch, as he just reluctantly goes along with your plan to start the Saints in the beginning. It'd make perfect sense if he came up with the idea, but no, that's not the case. Eli isn't invaluable in the story. He's the brains of the group. Well, you're the muscle, Kevin has connections, and Nina's handy, I guess. He's the glue holding you together and making a plan, the reason you dummies have any know-how of starting a criminal empire and running businesses. But the story forgets that he kind of needs to be more than that. And that's what I think the Eli problem is. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to dissecting the balance of the story. I saw some people argue that Kevin grows the least throughout the story, which feels like a fair assessment, so Eli might not be the worst there. And overall, Nina is just given way more important things to do than either of them, so that's not fair. And the bigger problem than Eli shining a little less than the others is just the horrible handling of the plot twist. I like how crazy the Nahuali gets, but you need to give it some foreshadowing first so that it doesn't look like you just gave up trying to think of an ending that made sense, which requires a lot more character development that he just does not get. The Nahuali problem is bigger than the Eli problem, but this is not a video about me finding the absolute worst part of Saints Row 5, just something that I found myself thinking about when it came to these three friends of mine after a couple dozen hours of playtime. But seriously, the thin plot is a major problem with the game. Why do we spend more time LARPing than fleshing out our villain? Although I'm sure most of this emptiness in parts comes from tight deadlines and forced rewrites, as research will show you this clearly had a tumultuous development, to say the least. Anyway, I'm done rambling about Eli now. Maybe 10 years from now I'll finally do that big retrospective on the game as a whole, or maybe sooner I'll dive into that Shanti problem I mentioned earlier. Who knows? I just love video games, and I love analyzing things. And now that I'm done analyzing this Eli thing, I'll say goodbye. Stay groovy, everyone, and remember, don't yuck someone else's yum.